Kathy Crowley. I've been a social worker for about 32 years now. I was first introduced to Solution Focus years ago, and I've kind of tapped in and tapped out of it until the last year or so, probably 2 years ago, and just really kind of immersed myself in it. And now I can't do the other things anymore because I used to think I was being really strengths-based, doing other interventions, and once I really saw the value of Solution Focused and what it truly looks like, this is really what I want to be doing with being strengths-based and really focusing on resilience. So that's what my talk is about today, is moving from being problem-focused to being solution-focused. Are you waving, Beverly, or did you have something to say? Waving. Okay. All right. So also just to give you a kind of a sense of it, so I have some slides and I'll be talking probably for about a half an hour. And then Rachel Yu is going to be joining me. She is a graduate student who also has recently moved from doing more problem-focused therapy to switching over to doing solution-focused therapy. And so as a newcomer to this, she's going to give you a little bit of a rundown of her experience with this, and then we're going to try at the very end to take some questions. So we'll hope that that will not be a big mess and that that will go okay. So when we get to that point, we'll probably take the questions from the chat. Until then, it's too much for me to manage to look at all of that at once. So if you have things in the chat, I won't see them till later. But I will go ahead and put my slides up, and we will get started. Okay, so from problems to solutions is what we're going to be taking a look at today. So I wanted to just start with, I hope you can all see it. Can you see the whole screen? Because I've got pictures down the side.
Yeah, we can, Kathy.
Okay, perfect. When you think about a variety of intervention styles, one of the things that you look at is with solution-focused work, you're always looking towards solutions. But if you think of almost any other intervention, what you're looking at is problems. So if you look at like CBT, if you look at ACT, if you look at DBT, if you look at EMDR, all of them focus on what the problems are with a lot of specificity of the intensity, the duration, and the frequency of those problems. And so you're spending all your time talking about things on that end. And really solution focused is the opposite end of the continuum, where you're not really focusing on the problems. You're looking instead at the solutions and what the preferred future would be. So it's a very, very different way of looking at what's going on with the person and where you focus your energy in the session. So I was just thinking about this and how I could help explain the differences between problems and solutions. One of the things that came to me that I've talked about in the various classes that I teach is, what is the difference between mental illness and mental health? So when you say mental illness, probably all of you can get a picture in your mind of what that looks like. Whether you're thinking of a diagnosis or thinking of maybe what people who are mentally ill kind of stereotypically look like or are projected to look like in the media. But people have a pretty clear idea of what mental illness is. People have a very vague idea of mental health. And so people aren't even able to identify, is mental health just the absence of mental illness, or is mental health something that you can ascribe to that's even more positive? But we don't really have a very clear definition. We don't have a clear way of knowing when we're existing in mental health. So an awful lot of people defer to, well, it must be mental illness, because they don't have a clear definition for the other side. And so it's language is such a problem when we're looking at problems and solutions. And so I had to put on here something about Brene Brown because I just love her. And if you look at her material, she talks a lot about the whole concept of othering. And othering is what you do to try and make yourself feel like you are not like someone else. And if you look at the whole issue of labeling with the mental health system, that really is what we're doing, right? The labels we ascribe to everybody else or to the clients that we see, whether it's through the DSM or the ICD-10, I think it is now. And then our label, of course, is our credential. And so everybody in the room has a label, but they are not like us and we are not like them. And that's just not the reality. We are them and they are us. there are certainly plenty of practitioners who have symptoms or have behaviors that you could describe as somewhere from one of those categories. And there are plenty of people that we call clients who have all kinds of resiliency and solutions that they live with, and all kinds of strengths and all kinds of things that we want to ascribe to be like. And so there aren't these two categories of us and them, of people with mental illness and people with mental health. Everyone's somewhere on that continuum, and you can flow on that continuum from not doing too well to doing a whole lot better. So the language that we use is really important. And I was trying to think of an example that would be a really strengths-based example of somebody that's doing this really well. And the example I hit on was Queer Eye. Okay, so I just have to self-disclose, love this show, can't wait for the new episodes to come out each time. But if you look at Queer Eye, and if you don't have Netflix, find somebody who does, because it's well worth it. They talk about all the people that they go to see for the makeovers. They call them heroes. They're not even clients, they're heroes. And what happens is they walk up to see these people who've been referred by somebody. And what they do is they ask, how can they help? They let this person lead the way. They set what they would like to have happen in their life. And these 5 guys come in and they just offer hope and encouragement and warmth. And it's really kind of the non-professional version of solution focused. They let the client, they let the hero guide them, and then they help them try and achieve what the hero would like. So they are a great example of a very strengths-based way of using vocabulary and using words. So I just keep them in mind, because I would like to be able to call all the people I see heroes. I haven't got there yet, but I'm working towards it. So when you first get started with solution focused, whether you're doing coaching or therapy, I think the approach starts before a person even walks into your office or before you even start the services with them. Because it all begins with the belief that all people receiving services are capable and all people are motivated for change. And every time I've been to a solution-focused training, there's people that raise their hand and go, well, what about, people who are mandated, and what about people with this diagnosis, and what about people with that diagnosis? And part of the challenge there is we don't believe that people are capable of making those changes. And when you don't believe it, you don't see it. But when you believe that people are capable, and when you ask them what their best hopes are and let them set the goals that they want to work towards, or I'll say goals for now, it's not really what I mean, but it's the best word I have right now. You're following them, and so they're able to make positive change. Even if the person comes in, a mandated client, and what their goal is to no longer come for services with you, that's a lot to work with. You have all kinds of things that you can help them identify of. If the person that said you had to come, what do they need to see so that you can stop coming? You can join with the client and with the idea that what you're going to work together to achieve is for them to no longer need services. That's a wonderful goal to have. I've done that with teenagers. They look at you like you're a little bit crazy, but then they get to work and they say, I need to follow this rule, and what will that look like? And I need to do this, and who will notice that you're doing those new behaviors? So the belief in people is essential before they even walk in to meet you. Without that belief, what can happen, again, whether it's coaching or whether it's a clinician, or now I would have to add whether you're a business coach, because now businesses are using this again, it's really easy to focus on what's problematic, what's causing the stress, or even to look at a diagnosis. It really is like a pet peeve of mine when people refer to someone as, oh, I've got 3 bipolars today. Like, no, these are people. They're not just a diagnosis. And so when we don't look at them as capable, it's easy to slide back into that. But if you focus on what's wrong, so will the person that's receiving the services. And then how is that helpful to them? They're doing that before they even come into your office. So when you join them and looking at what's going wrong, I'm not quite sure what they're paying for, because they're getting more of what they already could do all by themselves. So we want to be giving them something that's more challenging, that they're not going to think of on their own. And that's the beauty of solution focus with the questions that we ask. Sometimes we stump them, and it's difficult to answer the questions that we ask because they're not questions that people often ask themselves. So we start in Solution Focused with, what are your best hopes? And again, most people have driven or they've fired up their Zoom now to, on their way or preparing for the session, they kind of have an idea in their head of what they're going to tell you about how bad things have been and how awful things are. And when you start with, what are your best hopes? People are kind of stumped sometimes. They're not really sure what that means or how to answer it. But once they get on board, they're having a discussion with you that was not at all pre-planned, that's not something necessarily that anybody else has asked them about. And so the richness of answers that you get from that question is just so wonderful. We move them on from that continuum. So the very first continuum, we move them from being on the problem side to being on the solution side. And it feels so much more hopeful for them, because we're giving them the opportunity to consider a whole different perspective that they might not ever have considered before. So as you listen with Solution Focused, you're listening for some important keys. You're listening to any exceptions to the challenges they might be facing. And this might be very, very small, but it's really, really important that you listen for these exceptions, because those are the things that you're going to start to work with. You listen for times where they may have been successful or they've been pleased with themselves. Now, sometimes you might have to dig a little bit for them to remember this, but nobody is, whatever their challenge is, 100% of the time. And if they say so, you could ask them, say they're depressed. Well, they're probably not depressed when you're sleeping, or you're probably not depressed while you're taking a shower. But there's always some little moment of the day where they might not be whatever they say they are all the time. And you start there and try and expand that. You also look for areas of natural support within their lives. And I've heard several people now say this, do they have friends, family, neighbors, dogs, cats? Anyone living, any living thing can be an area of natural support. And so you want to try and connect with those as well, because that's going to be something that's going to be beneficial for them. If they have any examples of resiliency, now again, when you have people that experience trauma, the fact that they're sitting in front of you means that they've survived that trauma. So they might not be able to put words to what their resiliency is, but they have some resiliency because they're still here. So they may not have to find it for themselves that way, and they may see themselves as really beat down, but the fact that they're sitting across from you is an indication that there's some type of resiliency that's present. Getting them to notice it is step one. Getting them to own it is a lot longer process for some people, but that's really the direction that we want to go. And then you're also looking for strengths or skills that they already possess. And again, some people have a really hard time acknowledging these. Some people have a really hard time owning these. For some reason, some people have this idea that if you can name, say, 5 strengths that you have, that's somehow you being like conceited or thinking too highly of yourself, which is really an unfortunate societal message that we have, because everyone has strengths, everyone has skills. It's really fun. I love working with teenagers. I like best the teenagers that everyone else has given up on. And so when you find a teenager that's able to get every other adult to dislike them, that's a skill. It's not a skill that people like, but it's a skill to get everyone in your life mad at you. That takes a lot of effort and determination. And they keep at it day after day. There's a lot that you can work with there. You have to figure out how to label that in a way that will be positive, but there's skill there. Again, having the ability to own those things that are positive can be difficult for people, but that's what we're always listening for. As the session moves forward, you want to allow the person that's receiving services to lead the way and establish their best hopes, followed by their preferred future. That's kind of our menu. That's what we do with Solution Focused, right? And so when the person receiving the services sets these, there's no opportunity for resistance. You're following their guidance. And now I think this was the strangest thing that I first heard. I remember like in 1990, like there's no resistance. How is that possible? Because all through graduate school, I was taught, here's how you overcome resistance. Here's how you challenge resistance. We spent a lot of time figuring out how, as a clinician, I was going to manage their resistance. I was going to confront it and overcome all these horrible words. And when I went to the training at Solution Focus, and Scott Miller said, there's no such thing as resistance, I was really stumped and didn't understand it. But as I've seen the respect that you have for clients, the belief that you have that they have the ability to make change and they have the ability to move forward, there's no resistance because you're following them. When we tell people what to do, of course there's going to be resistance. If any of you told me what to do, I would have some resistance. It's a natural way of thinking. And so for years in all of the medical models, there is the authority telling the other person what needs to happen. So of course there's going to be resistance. But when the person is able to set their own hopes followed by their preferred future, there's just no reason for there to be resistance because they're pursuing what is important to them in the way that looks most appealing to them, in a way that's going to be the best fit for them. So how can there possibly be resistance to something that they're hoping for themselves? And this is really a hard thing for people to first get their mind around, especially when you're giving up those other interventions to move towards solution focus. And this is also why it's really difficult to try and do solution focus and some of those other interventions. Solution focused and cognitive behavioral therapy, they're just at loggerheads. They don't work the same. In cognitive behavioral therapy, we have forms, we have agenda, we have ideas that we want the client to work on. And in solution focus, it just doesn't work that way. And so it's hard for people to recognize that with solution focus, it's a whole different experience in the session. The clinician has no agenda going in. Right? The clinician is not in control of the session, which is problematic for some people, especially for newer clinicians, because they really want to be in charge of it because it feels like they know something that way. But the clinician should have very little influence on the outcome of the session. Our job is to ask questions and help somebody guide them guide themselves to what it is they want. It's not our job to set an agenda. It's not our job to approve or not approve what they're saying their best hopes and their preferred future look like. Other than like moral and legal things, we do have some responsibility there, but for the most part, those are the things that we're looking at. So you respectfully allow a capable person to lead the way to their own best hopes and future. This is just drastically different from what other people, from what other models of intervention are doing. So this is a quote that I just love. I've heard this like 3 or 4 times over the last couple months. It's from Bill O'Hanlon, who is not technically a solution-focused person, but wow, he has a lot of similar ideas, where he says, do not go sightseeing into someone's life. And the first time I heard this, I felt really guilty because I think I had been doing a lot of that. And so this is like a new mantra for me, is to focus on what's important to them, not what's important to us. Because it's very tempting, again, for us to, I think, look back, look at the problem, try and understand why somebody is the way they are, look at the core beliefs and look at the root of whatever is happening. But that's a lot less important than what is somebody going to do next. And so we're always trying to look towards the future, or sometimes we go to the past, see where they've had previous success that they can bring to the future with them. But we don't go back to the things that are painful and traumatic and just kind of not beneficial, because again, people can visit those places all by themselves. We don't have to do that with them. So I just love this idea of don't go sightseeing in someone else's life. It's going to be my new goal moving forward. So doing solution focus, our role as practitioners is to offer hope so that the person who's receiving services, to the person that's receiving services, sorry, and believe that each of them have the ability and the motivation to make their life better in a way that has meaning for them. And I think, again, the whole level of respect that's offered with this type of service is just so different. And I think that for people that are shifting from other styles of intervention to solution focus, this is challenging because we're just not often taught this. I think in so much in graduate school, we're taught that we somehow know more than the people that are coming to see us, and we have the answers, and it's our job to be kind of clever and creative and provide answers, and then give people homework and tell them what we think they should do when they leave the session. And that just is really not very respectful, because we limit then what they're capable of. And so when I've been doing some recent training with Brief and with Elliot Connie, they talk a lot about not providing homework, because when you provide homework, you really limit what someone's capable of, because they're only capable of what you have told them. And when you don't give somebody homework, they're capable of making all kinds of change that you may not have ever thought of. And so I'll give you just an example of this, and I learned this a long time ago, but it was so meaningful. There was a woman that came in to see me for her intake, and I was working at an agency where I was required to do a full assessment and write a treatment plan in the first hour. So we talked about what had been going on, and she was very depressed, and she went through about a half a box of Kleenex during our session until she got to the last one, and then she kind of laughed, and she said, I think one of the things on my treatment plan should be for me to not use a whole box of Kleenex next time. And so she had been so depressed and so discouraged. I actually wrote that on the treatment plan. I was like that's a goal, we're gonna go with that. And I said to her, you know what do you think you'd be doing if you weren't crying? Like, what would you do instead? Which is a big solution-focused word. What would you do instead of crying? And she looked at me and she said, I would make bathing suits. At which point my jaw dropped, because I didn't realize anyone made bathing suits at home, because it seemed very far-fetched to me. And I said, wait, you know how to do that? Aren't you worried that they would fall off, like in the pool or in the ocean? And she's like, no, I'm really good at this. And I kept being doubtful, which was just my genuine response. And suddenly she lit up, and she was talking about she would call a friend and have them come over to be measured. And I was just stunned that anybody could do this. And so I thought, wow, that's really interesting. So we finished our paperwork, and she left, and she came back probably in 2 weeks. And she said, first of all, I went to the lobby to get her, and I didn't even recognize that it was the same person, because this time her clothes were clean, her clothes were properly on her, she had showered, her posture was completely different. And she came in and she said, I'm only going to be here for about 10 minutes. I just wanted to come and say thank you. And I said, what have you been doing? And she said, when I left here, I called my friend, the last one that gave up on me, because everybody stopped calling me because I never wanted to do anything. So I called the one that gave up last and asked her if she would like a bathing suit. And so we went out to lunch, and I measured her, and I've been making bathing suits since my last appointment. Now, never in my wildest dreams would I have ever suggested that somebody make a bathing suit to make them not feel so depressed. My imagination just doesn't go that way. But when clients are capable and come up with their own, I don't want to say goals, but they come up with their own activities that are meaningful to them and that they want to pursue, it's amazing the things that they're able to come up with. So that is my best example of the instead question, and just how incredibly capable people can be even when they have a whole lot of other things going on. So we are going to move over now to Rachel, and then we're going to take some questions. So I did want to just leave you my contact information. I have two things. So I have an email, and then I also have a website, and there's a different email on my website. I have just a whole bunch of them. So either one of those ways, if you need to contact me, you can. So let me just get rid of this. And there we are. Okay, Rachel, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. Hi, everyone. My name is Rochelle, and I'm a doctoral student. I'm training in clinical psychology at Simon Fraser University, and I specialize with children. So we do an MA PhD combined program here in order to be a registered psychologist. So I'm about a fourth year graduate student, but first year my PhD. And I want to talk to you about the privilege I've had to have one client who I actually saw, and I started seeing her from a CBT approach. And then in the middle, we swapped to solution focused. So I've had the privilege of having this experience that has very much redefined how I see therapy, how I see my training, and how I see myself as a clinician. So Beverly Court, who's here, she's actually my therapy supervisor on this case. And I had a different supervisor before who was very CBT approached. She's actually the director of our training clinic. And when I had started seeing this client, I'm going to, for de-identification purposes, I'm going to call her Ruby. She is a middle-aged woman, and she had come in because she had very extensive interpersonal difficulties, some difficulties in her marriage as well, considering separation from her husband, and she had a very long, very long treatment history. She had been seeing a psychologist or a marriage counselor or a therapist or somebody for a majority of her adult life. And one of the biggest things that she came to me about was that I don't know if I'm ever going to not need to rely on therapy. I think I'm going to be in therapy my whole life. And this idea was something that was very hard for her. And she didn't want that for herself. And she would spend much of our sessions very tearful and in visible distress. And as a new therapist, you know, I'm still training. I haven't had a ton of clients, but I found myself often leaving those sessions feeling very useless and that I had wasted this woman's time. We had spent 50 minutes talking about how terrible her life is and how awful her life is, and how she's never going to be sufficient enough or happy enough to not need to rely on therapy to bring about happiness for herself. So that made me not feel good too as a clinician. And I would leave supervision sessions. So in my training program, you have one therapy session and then one supervision session. It's always a one-to-one. And I would leave supervision sessions feeling like I didn't learn anything. I don't know what I'm going to do with her next. I feel like I'm just wasting her time. I felt very incompetent, and I knew that I was starting to feel like I don't think I'm a CBT therapist. I don't think, you know, it's not just this client, it's other experiences that I've had with children even. I done practicums at the hospital here. Just doesn't feel like me. Feels like something's missing. Feels like I'm not connecting with my client. It feels like I'm talking at them. It feels like I go to my supervisors and they tell me, this is what's wrong with your client. Now you tell them what's wrong with them. And I would go do that because I'm a student and I do what I'm told. But in the back of my mind, I felt like this is not what I came to graduate school to do. This is not what I imagined I would feel like after a good session with my client. I wanted to feel like I was making a difference. I wanted to feel like I was doing what I wanted to, just committing myself to a program, which here it takes 8+ years to get your master's and your PhD. I wanted to feel like that was justified, and I really felt like it wasn't. So in the middle, I had probably had about 10 sessions with her, and then my CBT supervisor went on mat leave, and I swapped over to Beverly. And I said, Beverly, will you supervise this case for me? And I was already seeing another client with her, and I was already kind of buying into the solution-focused approach. And I thought, how interesting is it going to be to transition this client from CBT to solution-focused? What if she asks me, why are you asking me these different questions now? What are you trying to get at? She never did. And she answered all these questions, like Kathy was saying, that she might not have otherwise been asked in her entire lifetime. What difference does that make to you 5 years from now if you look back at this time? What would you be proud about yourself for? What are some things that you're proud about yourself for now? How did you overcome those struggles in the past? How do you think you can do that now? And now she doesn't cry in any of our sessions. She even laughs. And it was maybe 12 or 14 sessions in, I'd never heard her laugh in any of our sessions. She tells me she's calmer, she's more at peace. She speaks with pride about her accomplishments and her capabilities. And it slowly came to my realization that none of the people that she ever saw in that giant treatment history had ever treated her like the capable person that she is, the competent person that she is. So she always felt like she needed somebody else, when in reality, no one ever told her and ever treated her as someone who was fully capable of handling her situations on her own, navigating her marriage on her own, and that there are things and special qualities about her that she's allowed to feel proud about, and that she's allowed to say, like, hey, I like these things about myself, and they're gonna get me to where I want to be. So I've had a very unique experience, I feel like, and something that I do want to reflect on and you know, possibly turn into a paper for the Solution Focused journal. But I've never, she doesn't cry, she's very happy, and this is a woman who always thought that she'd have to go to therapy once a week for her whole life. And over the last summer, I've seen her twice. I don't know if I'll ever see her again, but you know, I know that she's doing well. I feel more useful as a clinician, even though I'm just training. I feel like I don't carry the weight of my clients' struggles with me the way I did when I was practicing CBT. I don't carry that guilt with me or the weight of their strife with me, because we don't spend 15 minutes talking about how awful people's lives are. We talk about how capable they are of achieving what they want from their lives. And I think the biggest thing is, when I would reflect on what I would do as a CBT therapist, is that I would be told, you need to educate your client. You need to psychoeducate your client. And with Solution Focused, never once have I psychoeducated my client, and I never will. And I feel like I'm so fortunate to come across Solution Focused and be trained by Beverly, because now I've identified this part, you know, that now this is starting to feel more like, this is what I came to graduate school to do. And this is not going to leave my identity as a clinician when I move out into the real world, when I have my own clients. The Solution Focused piece of it is probably going to be a really core part of the clinician that I'm going to be when I'm out there.
All right. Thank you, Rochelle. That was really great. I really appreciate you sharing that. So if people have questions, we have about 10 or 15 minutes. If people want, I wanted to leave time for people to ask questions in case you had them. And, you know, it's fun listening to you, Rochelle, because there's so much excitement, and there always is with interns. And I'm lucky enough that I do supervision with interns as well. And so the agency I'm at, they said, we can try doing solution-focused supervision. And so we start each of the supervisions with, what are your best hopes for meeting today? And the interns are like, what do you mean? And now we've trained them to do this with clients, but they're so surprised to have the questions asked about themselves. And what are you doing the best? What went well this week? And they have to own what they're doing well. And so it's been really fun. And it is a role where you have to do some psychoeducation as well. So it's not pure solution focused, but it's really fun to do that. Okay, so I'm looking at the chat, and I don't see any questions yet. But if people have questions, we are more than happy to answer them for you.
Can I just add one thing?
Sure, Beverly.
Rochelle's experience. I mean, one of the things that stood out for me working with Rochelle and her transition is the kind of negative attitude that her previous supervisors had about this woman as a needy, manipulative woman who would probably never get better, and it just was very unproductive. I'm sure these people are good therapists and really care, and you can see those qualities. You might call her those things, but the other side of it was, this woman was very passionate, cared about her therapy, really wanted to get something out of it. And once Rochelle was able to see her as this, other kind of woman, it just really changed her view of her, and this other woman came out. And I think that whole stance, not just the questions, not just kind of what our technique is, it's how you really see people that brings out a different way of relating to them, that brings out the best.
Right.
So,
oh, absolutely. Just sitting in a room where you know the other person has respect for you is so different for so many people that are coming for services. So we had a question of, can we elaborate on the difference between strengths-based approach versus solution-focused? And I think I can. So when I used to do CBT, which I did a lot of, I think that you would look at, say, like a thought record is a pretty common thing. So you would first identify what the problem was, and then you'd identify the difficult emotions that you were having, and then you would identify the negative thoughts. Then you would identify some positive thoughts. And so that's what's considered being strengths-based, but you're already in column 4 by the time you get to the strengths part of it. And you've spent all this time looking at what's not going well, and then you shift to, this is the strengths-based part of it. So while there are strengths-based parts to CBT and those other interventions I mentioned as well, the primary focus is on what's going wrong. And there's so much focus on like giving homework of, notice how many times you have those depressed episodes versus how many times you're feeling better. The focus continues to be so often on what's not going well versus what is going well. And when there's such a focus on what's not going well, when you have a small slice of what's going well, that's what's called strengths-based in some of those interventions. And it like Rochelle said, it just doesn't feel very strengths-based. If you believe a client's going to need to see you for 6 months, there's not a lot of strengths-based in that, because you're assuming then they're not going to get better. And that there's a difficulty with that. So that would be how I would explain that. Let's see, how do you work with people who say, I don't know, when you ask the questions? Okay. Teenagers, they love this. Okay, so I don't know is at least better than the shoulder shrug, which teenagers are masters at the shoulder shrug as well. There is a woman that did a presentation this morning for Europe. Her name is, I think, Frederica, and I don't know how to pronounce her last name, so I will. She has a book that she wrote that's called 1001 Solution-Focused Questions. And there is a question in there where if you say to someone, if they say, I don't know, and you can ask them, but if you did know, what might that be? And I have used that. I thought for sure that wouldn't work. It's worked really well for me. Now, I've heard other people where it doesn't work for them. So I think you could ask a variety of questions. So if you don't know, what do you think it might be? What do you feel? What would your best guess be? You can use some of those approaches. Or you can ask, what would someone else notice? Like, who is somebody that you care about? Because you don't want to just, if it's a teenager, you don't want to necessarily default to like an adult or their parent, because they might not care about that person. But like a friend of yours, what would they say? Maybe your best friend, how would they answer that question? How would they answer that question for you? So you look for kind of ways to help them. Sometimes the honest answer is, I don't know. Or I think with sometimes teenagers, they're not sure if they can trust you. So you get a lot of I don't knows, or they don't really know how to say what you're asking them. So you might reword the question and see if that can help. Or you just keep trying with patience. Again, there's a reason they're telling you, I don't know, instead of something else. There's always a reason that people are doing what they're doing. And if you believe that they are capable of answering that, they'll eventually be able to answer it. You could even say, I know somewhere in there you probably have an answer. Let's see if we can come up with just a piece of the answer. And sometimes that will get you a little bit further in that process as well. But sometimes teenagers, they're masters of I don't know. And again, for a lot of adults, it keeps them at bay. And so it's a really effective way for them to keep people out. So it can be a skill for them to use that I don't know in that way. Let's see. How does this work with trauma or grief after the death of someone close? Julia, that is a good question. This can work with trauma or grief because you're not trying to ignore what's happened, because difficulties happen in life. Trauma happens, grief and loss happens, but then nobody really wants to stay stuck there. It's not beneficial for people to just stay there. What do they want next? What are they looking for when they're feeling better? What are their best hopes when they're feeling less traumatized or when they're feeling less grief? What are their best hopes that will come? And so with that, their preferred future might be that that thing didn't happen, but you can't make that happen, nor can anyone else. So a lot of the suggestions I've heard is that given that this has happened, given that this is the reality, then what are your best hopes? So that you acknowledge and respect the experience that they've had, and then help them move to a preferred future from there. So I hope that that answered your question. I could probably do like a whole 2 hours on that one, so I try to keep it brief. Anyone you know combining solution-focused brief therapy with medical hypnosis techniques or doing research on it? I don't have the answer to that, but what I know is that somehow in England there are an awful lot of solution-focused hypnotherapists. So I'm not sure if they're doing that for medical hypnosis techniques, but Beverly, do you know more about that? Because somehow in England and in Europe, they seem to have more of a combination of hypnosis with solution-focused.
Well, the team of Rachel Gillibrand and Dorothea Reed, who presented in England, I left that for Hector there.
Okay.
She's on a medical team, which there's a psychologist who's solution-focused and she's a hypnotherapist, and they're both solution-focused, and they work with the doctors and the nurses in a very kind of, they call them the different pathways, the diagnosis pathway and the other kind of pathway. Yeah. So he might get in touch with them.
Great. Yeah, I knew somebody was doing that, but I thought you would know who it was.
Okay.
Is this approach still possible for someone with cognitive difficulties, for example, traumatic brain injury? I would say yes. Like any approach or conversation with somebody that might have a traumatic brain injury, you might have to make some adaptations for it. In one of the trainings that I've been at, Chris Iverson, who's one of the people at Brief, talks about a session that he did with somebody who had Alzheimer's, and people asked, well, how could you do that? And he said, I just forgot while I was having the conversation with her that she wasn't able to answer those questions, and she was able to answer those questions. And so I think, again, if a person with traumatic brain injury is capable of doing whatever they're capable of doing, that you have the conversation with them and see where it goes. It might not be the same conversation they would have had before their injury, but they might still be able to give you some answers to questions that probably nobody else is asking them, of what their preferred future might be. What are their best hopes for themselves? That would be really interesting to find out if they have ideas that other people have not, maybe don't know about or haven't asked about. So I would say it's possible. It would be challenging. Yes, thank you, Jeremy. That's the Frederica Bannock. That's the book I was referencing. Okay, so Julia, as a coach, I often work with people who've been in therapy, and there's a kind of learned helplessness, absolutely, from having been in therapy. Do you find, and if you do find this yourself, how do you start to wean people off this, the habit of mind? Is almost like a lack of self-trust, absolutely, and they seem to defer to me rather than source themselves. I think, Julia, that is one of the big, I was going to say hangover, that's not what I mean, but maybe it is. For people who've been in therapy for years, like Rochelle was talking about, there's this idea of like, well, I'll be seeing you next. And I actually had a client that came to see me. Well, they didn't come to see me because they called me on the phone. They said, my current therapist is seeing me for 52 weeks, and I want to know if you will see me when I'm done. I said, I'm not going to schedule an appointment for somebody for 52 weeks. Why would I think that you need that much services? That's crazy to me. But they chose not to see me because I wouldn't agree to that. So there is a mentality in the mental health field, I think, especially in the United States with insurance and how things work, that the longer you, especially when you have cooperative, insightful clients, it pays to continue to see them, which is really not beneficial and probably not very ethical. But there are a lot of people who have been told they're not really going to get much better, and they need the therapist to tell them what to do. And I think there are therapists that prefer that role of telling people what to do. And so it's hard for people to have that internal sense of being able to make those decisions. But as you heard with Rochelle, you can make that shift, and people can go from therapy every week, you know, for months on end, to twice in the summer. So it's possible, but they have to believe that they have the ability, and sometimes you're up against a lot to kind of retrain them from the model that they've been led to believe is the only one for them.
May I jump in, Kathy?
Sure.
Because that is something that is to a T what the client I was talking about earlier is like. She was like, I'm never gonna be able to exist without you. And she was very, right from the get-go, she was like, when are you going on internship? Because she was so frightened that she wouldn't have me. And because that's actually what happened with the last therapist that she saw at my training clinic. She left for internship and then she was without a therapist. And something that Beverly taught me that I think is really helpful is to have this discussion with your clients and say, you see me as often as you find it helpful for you. And I think that really highlights to them that you're using your resources to come see me. You're a resourceful person. You're looking after yourself. You're taking care of yourself. So when you feel like you don't need to see me anymore, you will know that. And there's no law that you need to see me once a week. You use me, you use this service and our therapy as often as it's useful to you. And I think that very much hands back the autonomy to them to decide how often they want to see you for.
Well, and I think too, a lot of solution-focused practitioners will ask at the end of the session of, would you like to schedule another appointment? Rather than assuming it and getting your calendar out and say, when do you want to come back? You ask them if they want to come back, or would you like to think about it and give me a call before we schedule? And so it takes the guarantee of additional services off the table, and it puts them in charge of when do they need to come back, if they need to come back. Now, I know that there was a training a little while earlier today on single sessions with Solution Focused, and there are people where that is primarily what they do. So I didn't get to go to that session. I know it's one I'm going to watch when we have the videos up, but having a single session for Solution Focused is something that is a possibility as well. People, again, people being heard and people recognizing that they have their own, excuse me, their own inherent skills. That is really new information for an awful lot of people. Okay, well, I have about 50 minutes into the hour. I think we are supposed to be wrapping up so we can hand things off over to Australia. So I would like to thank everybody for coming. I hope that this was somehow useful for you and that you'll take some nuggets away. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Kathy. It was very important for me personally, and it was very interesting, very interesting. I liked everything. So it was a very good presentation. Thanks.
Oh, thank you very much, Natalie. I appreciate that. Good luck to you.
You too, and you're great too. Thanks. Part of it was great.
You're welcome. Hey, Derek. Thanks for being a friendly face in the crowd.
You know, I just wanted to say hi, and then I miss you.
Oh, thank you. Have you been to other sessions?
No, today was very busy, so I purposely set aside time to see yours.
Oh, well, thank you.
I'm gonna, when they publish them, I really want to watch the Solution Focused with the LGBT community. I think. Yeah,
I was really disappointed that was at the same time because I really wanted to hear what Becca had to say because I really liked her. But yeah, I think I'm supposed to be over there saying goodbye or good day or something to the Australians, but I'll see you later, Derek.
Bye, Kathy.
Bye. Bye, everybody.